This podcast is sponsored by Boveda Humidity Packs. Boveda packs are meant to be stored with your cannabis flower. This helps control the relative humidity inside your jar, which is going to control the cannabinoid and terpene profile of your flower over time, so you'll never have to experience dry, crusty nugs. You may have seen Boveda packs in the weed bags you buy from the dispensary with your flower, but you can also purchase these for your home use. I highly encourage that you do, especially if you buy your flower in bulk. The packs come in a variety of sizes depending on how much bud you have at home. They are incredibly useful and affordable, and I noticed a huge difference when I started using these, and now I could never go back. I also want to note that every single Boveda employee that I have spoken with has been incredibly happy working at this company, and I have so much respect for them for being an ethical employer and helping fund education like this podcast. If you want to purchase some Boveda packs, the links will be available in the show notes of this episode. All right, welcome to Bioactive Season 2. Also, thanks so much to all the listeners. I was just checking the stats for this podcast, which I probably should do more often than I do. But we did reach the top 12 nature podcasts on Apple Podcasts a couple of weeks ago, and that's wicked cool. So thank you so much. I appreciate all the support from the community, and I have so many exciting things planned coming up, including a research project that each and every one of you can participate in. It's currently being finalized, then the initial testing will begin, and then it will be released to you. More on that next week. This week's podcast is going to be in line with some content that I've been putting out recently about cannabis and mindset. As many of you know, I am openly a daily cannabis user, or I should say a multiple times a day cannabis user. My relationship with the plant is very positive at this time in my life, but there have definitely been times where I haven't treated this medicine with the respect that it deserves, and I haven't treated myself well either. And this is in no way cannabis's fault. I came across today's guest, Phil Stille, on TikTok. Big shocker. A bunch of people tagged me in his video where he was talking about mindset of utilizing cannabis and how we can reframe our minds to think more positively about it and therefore have a more positive experience with it. I commented on the video and I said, come on the podcast, and now we're here. I've also spoken with Phil multiple times beyond this podcast recording, and I gotta say, he's a great person to be around when you're high because these topics go deep. In no way during this podcast are we saying that you shouldn't smoke every day or that cannabis is harmful, but there is no doubt that many people struggle with their relationship with cannabis and regulating their use or being the person they want to be after using cannabis, and that's going to be the focus of this episode. Of course, changing use patterns of cannabis is not for everyone. There are many medical patients who cannot do that, and that's totally fine. And there's many people who already have a positive relationship with the plant and don't feel the need to change anything. But I do think we can all take value in practicing the art of talking to ourselves with love and compassion and understanding the role that cannabis plays in our lives. Also, just a note on this episode, Phil's audio sounds absolutely crisp and dope on this episode, and mine kind of sounds bad and nasally, but obviously I'm going to put it out anyway. So I appreciate you kind of working with me here. Obviously, I'm kind of new to figuring out all of this, so I apologize for the lower quality on my end, but I hope you can work through it with me and forgive me for next time. Anyway, stoked to have you on the podcast, Phil, and let's get rolling.
So on this episode of Bioactive Podcast, we have Phil Stille. I came across Phil's video on TikTok a few weeks back, and he was talking about evaluating your relationship with cannabis. And I think a lot of the points that you were making, Phil, you could really transcend to many other substances or even components of your life. And that's kind of why I really wanted to have you on, because this information, it's important that we're talking about this, because sometimes in, stoner culture, it's not cool to be like, oh, I'm reevaluating my relationship with this plant. But we really should all do it at some point, or even like right now. So Phil, if you could please introduce yourself and a little bit about your background, because even I am learning so much about you on this podcast, and I'm so excited to start the conversation.
Yeah, same here. And I think it's funny we continue to learn about ourselves as we go along, right? First off, thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure. I started not to toot my horn for a second. I have started my own podcast, but this is the first time that I've done one as the other side of the thing.
Yay, cool.
I'm just gonna say that, like, off the bat, I don't know which one I like better. This is fun. I'm enjoying this, and we're gonna see where it goes. But I almost feel like it feels better to be on your side. Do you have an opinion on that?
I love being on both sides of it, to be honest. But that is a funny question, because I've been on quite a few podcasts, and I kind of like the component of, like, I don't know what they're going to ask me, but, having that little bit of suspense there. But you also don't really know, even when you're hosting a podcast, where that conversation's going to go. So I just like talking to people. So just podcasting in general is fun for me.
Exactly. And I like how you said in the beginning, starting it out, I figured it was before the call or during the call, the reason behind it. And I've said many times that, like, for me, it's similar to yours. I interview people that I have found and find interesting. And for me, it's almost like this ongoing library that I'm just going to always have, that I can always revert back to. Oh, I talked to someone that knows that. Let me go listen to it. You know what I mean?
So I do.
Cool. So, well, first off, I do discovery calls with people, and on discovery calls, I often, go over my history. So I'm no stranger to doing the Cliff Notes, but sometimes when I do the Cliff Notes, I can become winded. So I'll try to keep it concise. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
Also, I oftentimes am looking off as opposed to here when I'm, like, deep in thought. I don't know if you have any
I do that all the time. I actually do that when I'm recording videos too, because that's just, like, the way I think, and I can't always think well when I'm staring at myself in real time.
Yeah. I feel like there's some kind of that little essence of the unconscious relation with the self, where it's like, ooh, but look at yourself too, though. And it's like, when we look over here, we just, whatever. I'm just gonna.
Oh yeah, no. Feel free to look anywhere. Like, it's okay. You don't need to look at the screen.
Bypass completely. So, growing up, I was born and raised in the Bible Belt of the States, and I had a doctor for a father, narcissistic sociopath by definition. But growing up underneath his shadow, it was. I now realize it was a lot of me striving for his approval. But the thing that is worth noting is, like, there was no pressed on belief structure of how the world works. It was just more, you do this, and you shut up and you do it, kind of thing. And so there was always this, like, curiosity in me, growing up, but I never really did anything with it. I just smoked a shit ton of weed and drank beer and chased skirts, as I like to say, for, a couple decades. But I reached a point when I was like 35, 36, where it was like, what does this world mean? Like, what am I doing here? And even though growing up I was in the Bible Belt, there was religion all around me, but my parents didn't push anything on me, which I'm thankful for. Nothing against any particular religion. But I just reached the point where I was like, what does it all mean? And for me, I don't know what the listener base is, but I mean no disrespect by any means, but, like, it was pushed on me when I was younger. There were 2 times that I was basically forced to be saved,
Oh yeah, I mean, despite what people, like, have for a religion, I think in general people agree that you shouldn't push your thoughts onto others. That almost never works out.
Right, and because of the age I was, in my teens, like, that, like, really impressed on my subconscious, like, I don't like this shit,
Yeah.
And then I would also notice, like, so many people that were talking about, oh, you need to do XYZ. I'm looking at them and, like, but you guys don't seem like you know what's going on, So it's like, why would I listen, So
right.
Long story short, I was super resistant to anything, religion wise and spirituality too. But then I reached that point where I was like, all right, what does the world mean? I started researching things that have happened on the earth that are not explained by science. I'm not a student of one particular field like yourself. I'm super excited to talk to you and learn from you stuff. But here we go, me talking about me. But you know,
No, it's awesome. That's the beauty of being a guest on a podcast, is you can just talk about yourself. It's all good.
right? Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah. So where was I?
So you were talking about how religion was kind of pushed on you growing up, and you kind of were living by these guidelines set by your father that weren't necessarily anything that you felt were passionate.
Nailed it.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for picking me back up there.
Absolutely.
So we'll drive it in. We'll drive it into home base here real quick. But in my research, coming across people like Joe Dispenza, learning about the science of meditation, learning a little bit about neurology and neuroplasticity and how that, firing and wiring and all these different things, the connection between thoughts and emotions, the placebo effect, and like diving deeper into it. Like, wait a minute, I understand you guys understand that, but like, what the fuck is really going on here, And then realizing the power of belief, and then furthermore going down my journey of like messing with that, my subconscious, not messing with, but working with my subconscious and figuring out how it works. And then there were people in my life that were close to me that have moved on to the next level of existence, however you want to frame that. And so from that comes, for you either go down a downward spiral or you heal, And so I had reached the point in my journey where it's like, I got to make a decision, and I don't want to go down the downward spiral. So fuck it. And I just started really creating, dialing into my content, but there was a correlation of like the healing and the reach of my content. Now, granted, I'm still climbing in that regard, but there was definitely like an association with the growth alongside of the healing in a way that I don't know how to really describe.
Yeah.
It's almost like magical,
Yeah, I totally agree. And like that first leap of like allowing yourself to let go, and also being like, okay, like the placebo effect is real. Like our brain has so much power if we learn how to, use it in the right ways and not try to guide it in a way that you deep down don't want to go. And your brain knows that, but sometimes you get a little confused, with your heart and your brain, and you have these different factors like, what your father thinks about your career path, or, how you're accepted by general society. So it was like, was one of the big leaps for you, changing career paths from something that was accepted by your family and culture in general to something that was a little less accepted, maybe?
Yeah, and I say often that like you don't have to have a loss in your family to go down a road like this. It could also be a boiling point. But for me, my mom had passed away. We believe that my father had drove my mom to an early grave. And so when he in the last, months of his life, both my sister and I we were in a space where we just weren't really communicating. And it felt like cry wolf kind of stuff. And because he was so manipulative, we just didn't know. But then he moved on, and then it was like, oh shit, he's really gone. Process that. And then as I'm coming out of it, then I really started to see clear. I'm like, wait a minute, fuck. I've never wanted to do any of the shit that I was doing before. You know what I'm saying? And so then I started working for a hauling company, doing something completely different, because I'd always had a history of being in sales in some capacity or corporate job. I started doing like simple life hauling work, and I was like, this is nice. I like this a lot. But then alongside of that was the growth of the content. I ended up hiring a coach, and then working with him, he brought up to me, hey man, why don't you offer coaching to the people that are commenting on your videos? And my first thought was like, well, who am I to do that? And then he responded back with, well, who are you not to do that? And I was like, ooh, fair point. And so anyhow, I ended up giving it a shot. And then after the first discovery call, it just felt right. And, I don't know everything, and I never try to sound like I do, although sometimes the imposter syndrome in me is like, well, you think you like whatever, but it's really like, it's just because of how transformative this has been for me. And then realizing that I have that ability to work with people and seeing it work outside of them. Holy fuck, is that good fuel for the subconscious to see it working outside,
Oh, 100%. And I mean, I'm glad you brought up imposter syndrome too. That's kind of what I was thinking of when you were talking about this. And I always think of, how much good research, how much good content, how many good papers could be published if we don't if we don't allow ourselves to be succumbed by this condition of just being like, I'm not good enough, or I'm going to wait until next year or 5 years when I have more expertise in this field. Yeah. And you just can. If you want to do something, if you want a new goal in life, you really do have to like make that first move. And that first move is what inhibits like 98% of people from pursuing something that maybe they're more passionate about. And it is kind of this, is society going to judge me? Are my friends going to see me on the internet? Is that, embarrassing to you? Yeah. And you kind of have to weigh it out and just be like, I'm going to create content that's going to help people. If my friends find that, friends in big quotes here, if they find that embarrassing, then those aren't your friends. Yeah, and if it's other people in society, then who cares? You're probably never going to meet them. So you might as well do things that are going to improve your life and your environment, because everything else is just theoretical at that point. But you can have tangible results if you're actually making these changes in your life.
Yeah. So you being a student of your field created a student of everything you're a student of, created a little bit of that subconscious imposter syndrome in me. Because I'm like, a lot of the stuff that I talk about, the work that I do is related to the subconscious mind with individuals. And I've read books and texts and things of that nature. But like you've studied the shit. And so like I'm getting on this thing like, oh God, well, I'm going to say something. And she's going to be like, well, actually the way it works is this. Oh, fuck.
Dude, everybody thinks I'm a well, actually kind of person. And I am so far
I don't see you doing that. I don't see you doing that.
It's just like the internet and like the way I present myself. Like I dress like a mom or like a librarian. Like I'm not someone who like always looks the way I act, but I act, like very, very chill. And I mean, my specialty is communicating with consumers. So like I'm trying to just stay surface level. I usually don't dive into the science because I don't want to lose people. And that's not good communication. If you're at a conference or something and you're talking to another researcher about a super niche subject, like that's a rational time to start bringing up super niche topics. But I don't always think, a podcast or a TikTok is the time or place to bring up things that are not just super niche, but not that applicable to people. If you get too scientific, it's just not applicable anymore because people don't know what you're talking about. So, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up. But yeah, don't worry about me on this end.
Cool. My curiosity compels me to ask you a question now.
Yeah, hit it up.
So on the note of imposter syndrome, my theory based on the loose research that I've done and my own experience with myself and those that I work with is that as you're going down the journey of solidifying or creating a belief in the self, you're slowly changing the way that the circuits and the things and the science and the stuff happens to a direction where your subconscious gets more and more on board with you in different areas of life and different areas where there are different beliefs, And so with like me talking about, the work that I do, and knowing that it's working and knowing that I've read these and I'll come back to text like, yeah, okay, it's still there. Okay. I wasn't making it up in my head, but then you get on a call like this, or I get on a call like this, where I'm talking to someone who like, I know for a fact they like know this shit. So I'm just curious. That's what I'm thinking. The further along you go, you will always have like imposter syndrome things that come up, but it's really just a sign for another opportunity of growth in the unconscious mind or the subconscious mind. And then when you get past that one, the next one's going to be completely different. It's not even the same. And so it's all growth.
I completely agree. I think imposter syndrome, if dealt with in the right way, can kind of be like a case of good anxiety. Like a lot of times we characterize anxiety as this bad thing that we always need to remove from our lives. But some component of anxiety is a good thing, and it can be very motivating, and it can help catapult you into that next tier of wherever you're trying to go in your career or in life. So I think that's kind of similar with imposter syndrome, where it's like, yeah, sometimes you do need to talk to someone who has a different expertise, or maybe is an expert in that same subject, but a slightly different, component of that subject. And I think once you talk to that person and you realize that it really wasn't that scary and that you do have a lot of synergies in your thought and that, you know, talking to these people can actually help transform your thoughts a bit and make them maybe go into a different way, but not make you feel stupid. You know, once you kind of complete that level, then I think your brain does change and you are kind of in this new place of, oh, I can talk to someone even different than that, or even somebody who on paper might be even more qualified than the person I just talked to. And then it kind of helps build your confidence too, which imposter syndrome and confidence are kind of like on the same pillar there.
But if you were to, thank you, if that's amazing. If you were to look at it loosely from a macro perspective, like super basic, it's slowly shifting your subconscious in a direction that serves you for more happiness.
Yeah, I do think so. Yeah.
If you're going actively down the road of awareness, if you will.
Yeah, because I think it's awareness, but it's also kind of enlightenment, and it's also just courage and like kind of faith in yourself that you do know the things you think you know. And I think sometimes we need that acceptance from somebody that we think, you know, we might not be able to talk to or not be able to communicate with.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first off, like seeing your stuff, I'm like, I know that I can hang out with this lady and have a good time. I know that we were going to have fun conversation, but there was that little bit of whatever. And so I had to put a check there just real quick. Am I nuts? Okay. You say, all right, great. Carry on. We can keep going now.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, even on like TikTok, again, because I do a lot of science-based things. So I'll see other cannabis creators and they'll like go live on TikTok and I'll join their live because I genuinely want to see their perspective and like see them interact with people. And they'll be like, oh my God, Riley's here. Like, you know, she's way smarter than me. I don't want to say something wrong. And I'm like, oh my God, like I feel terrible. I would legitimately never say anything like on somebody else's platform that made them feel less than.
That's all each individual's own little imposter syndrome flare-up moment or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I hope people don't feel that way around me all the time, or at least I can help shift your perspective eventually.
I feel better now. I think I just needed to get like a little bit out. I just wanted to get like a little bit of like, so this is kind of what I think. What do you think? And you're like, yeah, that's good. All right, great. We can keep going. You know?
Yeah. No, it's always good to put it on the table too. Like rather than kind of letting it like eat at your brain throughout the conversation. Like I'm always somebody, people always be like, you're so blunt and direct with the way you talk. And I'm like, well, I can't focus on other things if I have something nipping at my brain. So I just have to ask the question that I need to ask and then I can move on.
Yeah. Beautiful. All right. So whatever you have on the docket.
Yeah, cool. I mean, I want to talk about, you know, when your perspective of your cannabis consumption changed during this journey and what, you know, what were the ways you really evaluated your relationship with cannabis and how has that kind of ebbed and flowed as you as a person have also changed?
Yeah. So before really going down the road of working to actually go within in any capacity, smoking for me was pretty much a constant every day. And whether I was with someone or not didn't matter. But when I was hanging out with people, I could be my jovial self, have fun. I was always kind of like a class clown kind of guy. But like when I was on my own, it was negative thought patterns more often, anxiety, like driving down the road and like seeing a cop like way back and be like, oh God, you know, like all that stuff was going on. And so I started documenting my journey of quote unquote, like getting my shit together on YouTube like 4 years ago or 4.5 years ago. And at the time it was just a vlog oriented channel, you know, where I'm like quitting weed day 1, day 2, you know, and I went through
that can also be helpful to hold yourself accountable. Like if you have an audience that is waiting for your day 5 and your day 7 checkup and et cetera, like you have cheerleaders that are cheering you on and saying, hey man, where's your video today? Or, hey, I noticed you haven't posted today. Is everything okay? Like I see those videos on the internet all the time. And I'm like, I love this community. I love the way people are
great.
Trying to build each other up, hold you accountable, and usually not in a mean way either. Usually it can be gentle in this context.
I've gotten to the space now, and I'm sure you're kind of that way too, where I'm scrolling through comments and like, it's almost like I can sense the negative energy of one, and my subconscious just bypasses it. Like, I don't even see it. I'm like, well, no. Oh, there's a good one. And I'll read that. But back when I first started doing this, though, I mean, there was like 5 subscribers or 10, you know what I mean? When I first started. So it was straight up an accountability tool. But then like halfway through, I'm like, I really enjoy doing this. And so it kind of continued as just like whatever. But what I noticed is that I could quit for, a couple weeks or a couple months or a year or whatever and experience clarity and experience growth and all of these things. But then like at some point it came back, and it would be the same kind of, and in my eyes, it's not really related to the amount of consumption. It's related to what are the thoughts doing? What are you doing with yourself? And that was the difference. That was the shift. Once I actually got to that space, my relationship with cannabis has never been the same. And I believe wholeheartedly and definitively that it contributes to the expansion of consciousness if you use it in a way that promotes that.
Oh man, I couldn't agree more. And I'm so glad you brought up like really being in tune with how you're feeling. It's not about, did I take 4 hits of my bowl today or did I take 12? It's about, how am I feeling as I'm consuming throughout the day? Are my thoughts really negative and self-deprecating, or are they really positive and, upbeat? And did you have any way to quantify that throughout the journey? Like, were you journaling, or were you putting like a smiley face or a sad face on your calendar? Or is it just something that you knew, like, okay, I've been sad for a really long time. Like, let's change something.
Historically speaking, I have not been someone who's fond of form, but the more that I've gone down the road of working with rewiring the unconscious mind, the more form seems to show itself in different areas. So that is something I'm doing more now. The journaling aspect would be me putting it on YouTube. And there were periods of time where a month would go by or 2 months and I didn't do a video, and then I'd come back, and then I'd be like, hey guys, I'm gonna do more videos. And this was just all vlog. Like my stuff now, because I'm in the space that I'm in, there's more kind of like, if you blah, 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 blah. Whereas before it was just like, I'd come on the camera and be like, all right guys, so I'm not smoking this week, and we're going to see how it goes, or whatever. And there was stuff related to drinking too, which that's a whole nother ball of wax. But, I've worked with people before that are like, they really got to get off cannabis, and they start with me. And the reason that they start with me is because of that, which is less of a thing now. But in the beginning, that was something that would happen. And it's like this one person in particular who's an amazing dude, great heart. And I wish him nothing but love and success and happiness on his journey. But when we started, he had just quit cannabis, and he was like, you're my guy, we're doing this. And I'm like, all right, brother, if that's what you want, I just want to make sure you're happy and stuff. And so, but we're like a few weeks in, and I discovered that he had been drinking like this entire time. And I was like, wait a minute, what? Because like, go the other way. Don't let go of that one and not this one, and just what's going on up here in your head is the most important thing,
Yeah. And that's kind of where I was going in the beginning of this, is like, I think a lot of the things you're saying about mindset and intention can be used for so many different substances, whether it's cannabis or alcohol or nicotine, or even things like caffeine, or even other plant products like kava. Like, it's something that you need to be able to evaluate and be in touch with your mental state, or it can really spiral quickly. And a lot of times, I wanted to actually ask you about this too, is I think a lot of consumers will say, I need a tolerance break. My tolerance is getting out of hand. I need a tolerance break. And oftentimes I don't think it's the problem of tolerance, like that they're actually using too much cannabis and maybe they want to save money. I think some of the time, and often, it's really about reevaluating your relationship with the plant, and a tolerance break is a good opportunity to do that, because yes, it can lower your tolerance, but also, give you the opportunity to really think deeply about why you're using cannabis. Yeah. Like, if you're just doing it because that's what you do at 9 a.m., or are you doing it because, you have a certain condition, or, hey, maybe like it does improve your mental state so much that you are not only a better person, but you're more productive and you're in that desired mental state after using cannabis, which is definitely the case for me. I feel like I'm in a positive mental state after using cannabis, but I've definitely been in times where it's like, okay, I just smoke at 9 and 12 and 4 and 9 because that's just when I usually smoke. So I'm just going to keep doing it. And it kind of did require that mental reset to be like, okay, why am I doing this right now? It's just because
So
I'm used to it.
on one side of the coin, I would lean back to you to talk about like the science behind, the physical health aspect of it, right?
Yes.
But and for me, in my perspective of all that is like, from what I understand, carcinogens can have a potential negative effect depending on blah blah blah. Long-term use potentially can have effects on your neurological network, I suppose. I'm not dialed into that. But the thing that I think that is the most important thing is one, is the person happy? And two, if the person is thinking that they are smoking too much, really diving deeper into where that original thought came from. And more often than not, it comes from when we were kids, and it's our parents, our grandparents, society, news, whatever, painting cannabis in a negative light. Oh, Timmy's a pothead. That kind of framing of it stays with us at an unconscious level. And while we may not be thinking in the moment, ooh, I'm being bad, but the unconscious, oh man, because I've talked to people and work with people that, we're a few weeks in and they're having progress, but then they're like, but man, hey, I'm still having, 2 hits a day of the weed. I'm like, dude, cool.
Yeah.
Great.
Like,
are you happy?
Yeah.
Are you happy? Are you happy?
Yes.
Are you really happy though? Are you really happy? That's all that matters.
And I love it. Like that is not an endpoint that we value in current medicine a lot. Like it's always like, oh, what are your blood markers like? Or, what are you productive? Are you good at doing your job at work and blah, blah, blah. It's like, are you happy? Like, are you happy? Because there's so many people that aren't in the world. And it's something, if you're not happy, a lot of your health is going to kind of deteriorate over time. So almost one of the best things you can do is just focus on happiness, or even just how to improve your happiness by a little bit, be more happy. And I think a lot of your health outcomes are going to change if you do have a healthier
Placebo.
mindset.
Yeah. There's so much science that supports it. And the only reason that it seems a little bit off is, again, in my opinion, society's indoctrinated subconscious belief of how the world works. And we really have to do our own digging inside and figure out, whenever I talk to someone about rewiring their subconscious mind, I always say rewiring it how you see fit. You research and decide what you want to consciously believe, and then install that in the software of your subconscious mind or your neurological network or whatever. Right? Yeah.
And actually, can we actually break that down more of just rewiring your subconscious mind? Like for the listener, like what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, it's kind of a metaphysical, it comes across as metaphysical, but yet there are so many powerful people that swear by it. And I'm becoming more and more at a subconscious level. And this, again, imposter syndrome, right? Like it comes, well, maybe that's all hogwash, and then I go back to no, it's real. Okay, keep going, and you feel the progress of it. But really it's understanding first and foremost that before someone actually decides to go within their own mind, whether it's inner healing or inner child work or whatever, before someone actually goes within, their subconscious or their unconscious mind or their neurological network is set up in a specific way because of historical events and how they've processed things that have happened in their world. And these subconscious walls that they built without even realizing that they were building it, because no one ever told us, hey, by the way, there's this really powerful machine in you that you can utilize to your advantage. Instead, it was just shoved with all this stuff, right? And the thing is, that can sound super fucking simple and woo-woo to someone, and so many people will resist the fuck out of it because of the way their subconscious mind is set up. Yeah. But in reality, I don't claim to know exactly how it works. I always say there's different aspects of it, right? Like there's an aspect of the subconscious mind that is your relationship to money. There's an aspect of the subconscious that your relationship to weed, your relationship to your mom, your father, whatever, situations, how you respond subconsciously when someone pulls out in front of you. There's all these different layers of it, right? Yeah. And so, just to, and this is a challenging question to answer, but to loosely answer it, in my opinion, for someone who's just beginning to go down this road, or they're like, oh, what's this about? I guess I'll do it. It starts with management of content digestion, in my opinion. The first hour and last hour of the day, and you having a little bit more study in this arena. Tell me if you have anything to weigh in here. But the first part of the day and the last part of the day, the subconscious mind is more receptive than any other time of the day. So that would be the time to avoid media boxes and to spend time talking to yourself or outside in nature. Whereas so many people wake up and go straight to their phone to check their messages, et cetera, et cetera. So you're that person is putting themselves at a disadvantage in that day. And if you do nothing more than just the morning and the evening ritual that you find that's good for you, that doesn't involve TVs and puts you in that good space, now you're creating momentum for your whole life. And that's part of rewiring the unconscious mind. But another part of it is practicing awareness of the things that we frame unconsciously and consciously by ourselves or with others, and beginning to reframe those things. Man, it sure has been a struggle, blah, blah, blah. Well, it's been challenging, but I'm making it through,
Yeah.
What's the energy behind I'm struggling, or I have problems? Everybody that I work with, I'm always getting to change problems and struggles to challenging and obstacles. Just,
Yeah.
The
language yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I agree. Like the language that we use, even just in conversations, if someone's like, oh, how's your day? It's like, oh, just another day, blah, blah. It's like, or you can frame the way you respond to things just to sound more positive, and then kind of train your brain to think that you're happier and more positive in conversations. But I also just wanted to
the only reason that someone has resistance to it is probably oftentimes the old school, like 90s, someone comes in for a company. It's like, hey, we got people coming in for lunch today. All right, guys, everybody be positive, and stuff. And like, that's hogwash. But then furthermore, the only reason that you have resistance to this is because of how fucking amazingly solid a structure the subconscious mind is. So in order to go the other direction, you just have to install new software. But people are resistant because they're like, dude, it's not that easy and stuff. I'm like, well, it's not easy. It's a process. It's work, but it's all about, what are you feeding your subconscious? What are you feeding your mind?
Well, right. And then you talked about, media outlets, social media, and a lot of times it's, it can be educational. There's a lot of educational content, but oftentimes it's kind of just numbing. Like sometimes I'll be scrolling on one of these apps and I'm like, oh my God, that was 15 minutes. And I can't remember a single thing that I watched in those 15 minutes, which is insane to me. But also there's the news media, and, my husband and I don't watch a lot of news, like at all, which is a good or a bad thing, depending on who you are, but just something we choose not to do. Thing. Yeah. But I mean, if, I was just at my parents' and the news was on, so I was watching it for a minute, and it's just like mass shooting and shark attacks and the submarine and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I see why the world is anxious. I mean, this is a lot of very heavy things that as humans, like we're really not supposed to have to worry about. Like we, traditionally would have to worry about, like, am I going to have enough food for my family? Am I going hunting and gathering, and, very traditional. But now it's like, oh, the world is burning all the time, and we're all supposed to just take that burden and live with it. And it's not supposed to affect our subconscious, where it absolutely 100,000% does.
Yeah. I think it's Neville Goddard always talked about framing, whether it's ideas of your history, present moment ideas, or ideas of the future. And I think that comes into account with news as well. The first starting point for me on news is that if you're watching something or digesting something and the person is making money off, or the company is making money off of you watching the news, then it's already biased, just like out of the gate. You know what I mean? Like, they're all so biased. Like, they're not fooling anyone. They are not fooling. And you can tell, fear-mongering.
Fear-mongering. And then politics is just sneaking its way into, like, essentially every story. And I mean, politics is so dirty.
Here's my theory, just real quick.
Yeah.
I don't spend any time watching the news, because in my opinion, I'm better suited working on my relationship with myself and creating peace in my life and helping others do that than worrying about what's going on in some other country. It's just because my thing is, what am I going to do about it? And I'll tell people, like, are you going to go do something about it? No? Well, then stop watching it. You know what I'm saying? But anyhow, in my opinion, what could happen? Well, we could have some kind of a financial meltdown, or there could be some kind of a war, or some kind of a fucking meteor. I don't know. Well, whenever the time comes, it comes. I don't see any reason to stress leading up to that point. Stress is a natural human emotion, but we're not meant to live in it. If news clearly promotes more stress, why would I do that? And I've had people I've worked with before, they're like really doubting the news. Like, all right, well, hey, can you just like find a couple different sources of news that you trust that are like articles, and maybe you squeeze it into like Tuesday or something, you know, but the rest of the week, like you don't have to be glued to it is the thing.
Well, and it's just a repetitive like cycle of stories too. It's like, there's really not that much news, but I mean, okay, so this was important, but I want to get back to cannabis too. And kind of a goal of this podcast was to have these important conversations, but also to make it as practical as possible to the listeners. Sure. So for a listener, okay, picture you have a listener and they're listening to this episode and they're saying, I think I might need to reevaluate my relationship with cannabis. What are some things that you would recommend that person do moving forward?
So my perspective on that is that the subconscious mind doesn't know the difference between the energy of the words you're talking about someone else or yourself or whatever. It does seem to have a filing system, you know, in place of some sort, but when someone is looking to, like, if I get on a discovery call with someone and their opening thought is, I really feel like, you know, I got to do something with cannabis. To me, it's a clear sign, and sometimes we have to walk there. It's a clear sign that really what's needed is a relationship with the self. And if you start cultivating a relationship with the self, your relationship with the plant is naturally going to get better. But with respect to the plant itself in specific, if you just practice awareness when you go to it.
Okay, yeah.
Like straight up, like, so you notice that you unconsciously went to, well, first off, you have that thought come up of like, all right, I'm gonna smoke, you know, or you, not even a thought, you're just going to smoke and you catch, oh shit, okay, wait, here's an opportunity like the bearded hippie dude was talking about. All right, so why am I doing this? You know, and then you let whatever come back, well, it's because this is what we do. All right, I understand that, but why? It's been a long day, man. Can we smoke? It's like, all right, well, let's just go outside. Can we go outside and do it, maybe? And not watch the TV this time? I guess. Whatever. And maybe if you go to smoke or you don't smoke in that moment, you're practicing awareness around the smoking, right? You're practicing awareness of your thoughts. If you happen to go smoking and then now you're sitting on the couch and then all of a sudden it comes up and then it comes up, oh, fuck, I forgot about the bearded hippie. Oh, shit. Okay. Hey, it's fine. Don't panic. Get up and go outside and start thinking about things that bring a smile to your face. This shit is so fucking simple, but it's also super complex. But in individual moments,
it's really not that simple.
Right. It's simple in the perspective of you. If you catch yourself in that moment and you're like, fuck, it's like, okay, great. Get outside and start thinking positive thoughts. Start talking to yourself about your wins. Start thinking about someone that you love or an animal or whatever, and like, smile and feel that, and it shifts the interaction with the plant.
I agree. And I love that you recommend people go outside, because this is something I always recommend to people. And especially, going outside and switching up your consumption method. If you're somebody who's using carts or pens, like as your main consumption method, which I will note, like a lot of people with chronic pain or other chronic conditions kind of need that extra dose throughout the day. But if you are like, let's say a recreational consumer and you're using one of those pens, you can hit that thing so easy between meetings or even during a meeting or like every 15, 20 minutes. So, something I recommend people is to, try a different consumption method that takes a little bit more time to prepare rather than something like a cart, because, say it's rolling a joint, that's going to take you a minute or two. And then if you pair that with going outside for a walk, now you have, let's say, a 10-minute journey with this cannabis, and you're outside, you're away from screens, you're looking at, a piece of grass or a leaf, or you're looking at other people just kind of living, and you're letting your brain kind of relax and focus on that moment rather than always just trying to like sneak in cannabis between the other things that you have planned for the day. And it's really not like its own, intention and component of that day.
Yeah, I might even go, I love that. I might even go with like someone who's like, well, I need to smoke so that I can do X. One thing is, if that's how they frame it, that's what their subconscious is operating on now. So it's like it's showing itself in all sorts of ways. But if you start changing that framing to, well, I prefer to enjoy cannabis when I do this. We're not even changing the frequency or nothing. Fuck it. No, we're just changing the framing of it. And then you start changing the framing of it, and then you notice, oh shit, I don't need it as much because the framing's changed. I'm telling my subconscious something different, you know?
Yeah. No, I really like that too. And yeah.
But it takes time, right? It takes time. You're not going to just, blah, 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 and then everything's changed. Like it's a journey.
Right. And I find that people choose their words pretty carefully when talking to others sometimes, but we don't choose our words carefully to ourselves, which is just a crazy concept, because I don't know why we think that we're, so much more tough and rough, and we're not going to be like subjected to these differences that we feel from these negative words when we talk to ourselves. But we do. Like, you can essentially like bring yourself into that lower, almost like vulnerable, and the cannabis is in control of you. You're not in control of the cannabis if you frame the words that way. Yeah,
I've heard that Mother Mary shows you what you need to see.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm not saying that's exactly it, but when you're someone who has like a lot of anxiety or depression as you're sitting with cannabis, might be a good place to go within there and work on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So
because here's the thing: the subconscious indoctrinated belief is that we have to go outside to fix our world.
Yeah,
there's something I got to fix out here, and really, it's not that. Anyhow, carry on.
So that's important. And like shifting mindset, you would, say not necessarily you need to start consuming less cannabis, but you need to rework your mindset around cannabis, whether that's, as you mentioned, going outside, but also like maybe sometimes there is the component of using less cannabis if you feel that cannabis is making you like lazy and tired, and if that's like a constant thing that continues to build up and give you anxiety because you're not getting your goals met because you're blaming cannabis for that. Maybe you do need to reframe your mind of like how much cannabis you are using. And again, a recommendation that I would give to people, if you are used to using a certain amount of cannabis in a day, but maybe you just don't want to be as high all the time because you're not as productive at meeting your goals, I always recommend people mix in hemp, because hemp has CBD instead of THC. So it can really help, like, you still are consuming cannabis, and that's kind of like helping just how you feel in general. But you're reducing the amount of THC substantially so that you kind of are training your body in different ways to shift that mindset and to start doing other things. And maybe you aren't feeling as lethargic and tired and lazy after consuming. I don't know if that's something you've ever, mentioned to anyone, but I find it helpful for some people.
I usually start with people, like on all the discovery calls that I've been on, when someone comes to me, whatever the opening line is, underlying all of that, they seek a little bit more happiness. They seek a little bit more freedom. They seek a little bit more joy. It's something. It's never the thing. They want a little bit more of one of these things, right? And regardless of what the opening statement is, when I go to say, all right, well, hey, let's just talk about what your daily routine is like. You find going to the phone first thing in the morning. You find watching Netflix a lot. You find not getting out in nature. You know what I'm saying? And so my first thought is, we got to fucking start here. This is where we start. You know what I mean? And then go from there. And more like the vast majority of the times after that is begun, so much happiness comes from just that alone. Everybody that I speak to on a discovery call, if we end up, 10% of the people I speak with end up becoming clients. It's not relative, but it is relative. But I always say at the end, regardless if we never speak again, if you just make your morning and your evening ritual be for you, and really, I don't even care if cannabis is a part of it or not. I'm talking about, what are you doing with your body? What are you doing with your mind?
Yeah. And I mean, it is clearly a topic that I think a lot of people struggle with, because I'm going back to that TikTok that I saw of yours that had over 100,000 people liked that video. I mean, it's something people are struggling with. And I think you put it into words so beautifully, like in your content, and you make it really open for people. It's not like judgmental, because you're like, listen, like I have been there too. I've consumed cannabis all day long. And like I was able able to shift my mindset, and I saw the positives of doing that. And I also just want to say, like, I do believe at some points in our life, using substances can be beneficial to get over a really, really, really difficult hump in time. Like, if you do have a situation where there's just, it's so overwhelming, it is just a lot for your brain to handle. The concept of escapism, of using something like cannabis and getting really, really high out of your mind so that you don't have to deal with something, that can be fine for, like, let's say a week or 2 weeks or a short period of time where, like, you physically cannot deal with that situation. But, you know, eventually it's something that you will have to reevaluate in order to have a positive relationship with that plant and with yourself, because it's not sustainable to live with escapism as your main goal of using a substance.
Yeah. So, and, you know, there's such a variety of different styles of cannabis people out there in the cannabis world. I think that the algorithms find like a particular quadrant of that, and that's who I'm usually speaking to. But every now and then, ones from other camps come in and they're like, "You're fucking wrong," and I'm like, "What?" You know?
Oh, believe me, I know. It's every subject. There's always someone who's like, I don't believe you, and it's like, okay, that's fine. But as long as it's helpful for the right audience, and that's all that matters. But that is one of the difficulties. Speaking of mindset of social media, it can definitely be difficult on your subconscious, as you're talking about. Like, you are kind of getting directly berated by the internet, and that's not always easy. And I always tell people, like, if you are a content creator and you are struggling with your relationship with yourself, I would not make content. Like, to be honest, I would not make any content because
you gotta have that shit locked down in a certain way.
Exactly. And it's almost something you should kind of practice and have a good routine for before you start creating content, because I've seen people spiral so hard after beginning to make content because, you know, people who have no face on the internet will say anything to you just to kind of to bring you down sometimes. But it's okay, because there's enough people also providing positives, and hopefully you can kind of focus on that and let go of the others.
Yeah, I mean, I've even commented on people like that before, and oftentimes I don't even comment, but I've commented and been like, "Thank you for this challenge today. I hope you have a good day." You know?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And then they're like, "Well, I was in a bad mood, man. I just, you know." But it's funny that's a pretty common thing. Anybody, I mean, it really is true. Anybody that comments any sort of negativity is not in what I would call a good space with themselves.
Yeah, I agree. And unfortunately, like, they do take that out on the internet, but that is something that they are clearly struggling with themselves. And it is sad, and it's not something we should really engage with, because they'll just keep doing it.
There's really no point. There's really no point.
Yeah.
I have had a couple people that would fall in that category, but by the way they do it is like there's comic genius to it. And I'll comment and be like, "Listen, man, I gotta tell you, this is fucking hilarious. You know, have a good day," or whatever.
No, I agree. When it's funny, it's a little softer, because you're like, okay, you're hilarious. But oftentimes not. I also, you know, again, this isn't really about shifting mindset, but I made a video a while back that was just some tips and tricks to have more intention in your consumption. And I would like to hear your opinion on these, if you've ever heard of them, or if you think you would find them useful, or the people that you coach would find them useful.
What you got?
So one thing that I've heard a lot of chronic cannabis consumers do is they set a consumption time. So it's like, okay, I'm not going to consume all day, every day. I'm going to only consume at 5 p.m. when I get home from work. And that way, you know, it not only helps lower your tolerance, but also it's kind of almost a reward for like waiting to that time period, and just helping with like not being stoned all day, every day, if that's not something that fits into your lifestyle. So I already kind of mentioned switching up consumption methods, especially if you're using something that is super, super available and accessible and discreet. Those can sometimes be the easiest to overconsume, whereas ones that take a little bit longer can involve a little more intention. You know, this is just about tolerance, but switching up your strain is another good way to just help maintain a lower tolerance. And I also have this concept of an intention jar that you could keep next to your piece, whether it's like a bong or your rolling tray or your bowl or something like that. And you can have a few pieces of paper and you can just have, what is my intention of consuming cannabis at this moment? Is it to get high? Because oftentimes that is an intention. Or is it to be nicer to your partner when they get home from work? Or is it to be able to enjoy the outdoors? Or is it to be able to have a tea party with your daughter and have fun? You know, like being able to set an intention jar of saying, all right, there's a purpose for this consumption right now. I'm not just doing it because it's part of my routine.
Mm-hmm. Do I think that well, intention just as a whole, I think is massively valuable. And I really do like that. I love that idea for the person it resonates with. I'm just thinking back to an older version of myself.
Yeah.
I probably be like, that sounds cool, but whatever. You know what I mean? Like, because it's just like, it's extra steps, you know?
I agree.
So like what I'll tell people is like set intention with the cannabis and actually treat the cannabis as if it's a conscious entity, because it fucking might be, you know, it fucking might be, right? And so
we can't go down that path because I could talk about that forever.
Well, I'm just saying. So when you go outside, like if you're going for a walk or something, and you have that ceremonial rolling of the J, and you're just like, man, thank you so much. I know in the past that, like, you know, I thought you were bad and all that, but I know you're not bad. That was just subconscious indoctrinated belief. You actually served me my whole life, and I'm fucking thankful for you. Hell yeah. All right, so we're gonna go. I'm gonna set intention. We're gonna go for a walk, man. Take me wherever you want to take me. I'm so thankful for you. This is awesome.
I love that. And even like, say like mentally your intention was to be better at creative writing. This is actually something I do a lot. I use cannabis to be more creative with my writing, so it doesn't sound like a sterile academic wrote something. So like that is my intention of consuming before I write. And then I'm always like, thank you, cannabis, because this turned out so good because I used this plant before I started writing, and I would not have been able to do this without the use of this plant. And again, I'm thankful, I'm happy, I'm proud of myself for creating what I did. And that's kind of that's kind of intention and mindset combined, which is, I think, everything you're talking about.
Yeah, I love that for the people, like a general broad range of the people that follow me, that there isn't a part of them that's like, I got to get my cannabis under control. You know, it's holding me back or whatever. And I don't mean to make light. I'm just a comic. It just happens inevitably. But at the core there, it's that unconscious relation to cannabis. That's it. And so when you start speaking more, you know, good words about the act and setting intention with it and shifting how you actually interact with it, like there's fucking massive benefit in that. You know?
Yeah, actually, this kind of loops into one of the questions from one of the listeners that I would love to ask you, because I think it's a great question. And this kind of has to do with intention, but also if you're in the process of trying to shift your mindset. And the person's name is Adam Sinbad that asked, do you have any suggestions for using less cannabis or being more mindful if it is essentially all you do around your friends? I don't want to lose my friends because I use less weed or I'm different.
Yeah, that's the answer that I would go to may not be the answer that this person seeks, but you know, the question I think really is like, you know, do you want more happiness? Is that what you want? If you want more happiness, then you go to like the simple rules of happiness. And there's so many of them. I know I say it's simple but complex, but it is simple. But one of those is, and you've heard it so many times before, you are the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with. I feel that doesn't necessarily have to be in the physical space. You could watch Tony Robbins every morning on your ride to work, and now he's one of those people. But I understand also not wanting to, quote unquote, lose friends. But sometimes you got to be open to changing your surrounding influence in order to grow. You can stay there or you can grow. And it doesn't mean that you have to, that necessarily means that you're going to, quote unquote, lose these friends, but rather that you begin to start taking more ownership in your own path and practicing a little bit of separation from it. So if you're hanging out with them, 7 days a week, maybe dial it back to 4. Or if it's every weekend, maybe only on Fridays, and you kind of like start cultivating more of a relationship with yourself. And the reality is, in my opinion, the unconscious desire or relation to not wanting to lose friends stems back to the same place that all this shit stems from, not wanting to be alone.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And just from what you've taught me during this podcast, I think something else I would say is like, try to create your own narrative and maybe change their mindset too. If you can use affirming words and use positive words to shape the conversations while you're with that group of friends, maybe you'll all eventually start to have this mindset shift towards happiness and positivity and being thankful for the plant and not using it as like a numbing device, but using it as a tool to shift your mindset.
Yeah, it's really a question of whether they want to grow or not. And probably if you do that, if you start shifting it, try to shift the direction in one of these hangout sessions, you'll probably find out pretty quick, because you'll either get like, hey man, what the fuck are you talking about? Blah blah, and then you over here, or you'll get like, oh man, I never thought about it, And so it's like, if you get the former, then maybe don't hang out with them as much. There's 7.5 billion people on the planet, and the reality is you're never fucking alone. But until you start going within, and that's not touting any particular dogma or religion, it's just spirituality. If you believe that you have a soul, then you are a spiritual being, have a human experience. I mean, that's just it. We don't have to quantify it. And all we know is that the more we cultivate a relationship with self, the more you realize you're never alone. Because I can relate to that. I can relate to that very, very much. But it's your unconscious mind. Go the path within. Rewire your neurological network. Seek happiness.
And frankly, like, if your friends don't support your path to happiness, that's not the best friend you could be hanging out with anyway. I actually had one more question, so I'm going to bring that one up too. This one's from Marissa Andres. They ask, how do I help someone else start to evaluate their relationship with cannabis?
That's a fun one for me, because my answer to that is you don't. I feel that. But here's the thing. When you want to help someone else and they are not looking for help, no matter how good intention you are, whenever you present it, no matter how eloquent you do it or the timing, this is perfect timing, and you do it, they're going to have fucking resistance to it. They're going to have unconscious resistance to it. Maybe you might get a little bit of a door open, but the amount of times that you would have to do this example to get a little bit of an open door it's not worth the effort. The other alternative is to continue to shine your light, continue to go down your road. And these people are either going to be like, fuck, what kind of juice are you drinking? How do I get it? Is there a cult or no cult? Or they're going to just go on their own merry way and they're not going to be in your life anymore. And either way is fine. But I think, and oftentimes this is a relationship scenario, right? Where it's a girlfriend or a boyfriend and they're like, oh, I wish my such and such would figure this out. My thing there is like, well, maybe you're not totally happy. Maybe that's it. Because at the end of the day, we are responsible for our thoughts and emotions. You are not responsible for someone else's thoughts and emotions.
No, I really like that that perspective. And I think there's ways to kind of help shift that person if needed into being more positive and potentially being more happy, but they have to want to shift their mindset in order to shift it, or it's just not going to work.
You can pattern interrupt people without them realizing that you're pattern interrupting them. If someone's like, oh man, did you hear blah, 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 blah? You'd be like, oh, for real? Hey man, did you want to go get some biscuits later? You just fucking take it somewhere else. And then if they try to bring it back, like, dude, I really want biscuits. And maybe we can talk about this later. Can we go get biscuits? Like, oh man, I really want to. All right, man, I'm going to go get biscuits. I'll see you later. You know what I mean? Like, exit yourself from the situation, but you can try to, set people on different directions. But I mean, I really feel that anytime you try to, because what you're doing is you're trying to fix someone.
Yeah.
It doesn't work.
And you're trying to fix someone and you don't know the full context of why that person feels the way they do. Like, you're not in their brain. So you're kind of just this outsider alien trying to help someone. And it just.
And really, they're trying to fix someone so that they feel better.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You can do that yourself.
Exactly.
In a way that sticks.
No, I think that's important. So I kind of have a question. So a lot of people get anxious when they use THC, high THC products. And we have the science behind this. Like, at low doses, THC can help with anxiety, like low 2.5, 5 milligrams. And at high doses, it can cause anxiety. But I think part of this, too, is it's just something I've been thinking about is a lot of the people I know who never get anxious from smoking are not just people with a high tolerance, which absolutely that's a big part of it, but also like genuinely like really happy people, like don't get super, super anxious and consumed in their brain when they're using too much cannabis. And I think that could be a part of why some people do get anxious, is it's like they have so much they're trying to change in their brain, but they're not really following an avenue to do that. So it becomes super overwhelming, and cannabis can really help open up your brain and be more aware of that. And that's why it's just like so overwhelming when you start to use THC products, because it all hits you at once and it can be a lot.
Mm-hmm. So, well, my general, and I haven't done the studies, I haven't looked into the science of any of this, but I mean, aside from just loose reading, nothing like dialed in, but it seems pretty clear to me that, and from my experience too, the anxiety that I used to have with smoking, like, it doesn't ever happen anymore. And I'm a somewhat consistent smoker at this point. So it's because I'm dialed into when I'm doing it. I'm doing something in the present moment. There's no mindless scrolling. There's no Netflix and chill. It's like I'm going for a bike ride in nature, or, I'm getting on a powerful podcast with someone else in the interwebs. You know what I mean? Like, it's just a different relationship, but it starts with the relationship itself. The underlying thing there is, what does Mother Mary show you, right? The anxiety is pronounced. Well, that means that there's some stuff in deeper in you, and so if you go down the road, because too many people, it's like, well, I got anxiety, so I take XYZ, and I take no.
Listen to the anxiety. Yeah,
go within. Yeah. That's the source. Stress is the number one killer, the source of all, or the majority of all human suffering, if not all human suffering.
Yeah, and stress causes inflammation, and then inflammation, takes over your whole body. But I also wanted to touch on that a little more. So one of my final questions, as we're kind of encroaching on an hour, is, so you do currently consume cannabis, and you still have a very positive relationship with cannabis, and that's kind of like changed incredibly over, your journey. I tend to ask people, like, do you use cannabis? Do you use other products? Like, what has been helpful for products that you use in your healing journey?
It's pretty much been the cones is my general mode of whatever.
So you smoke like raw cones?
Yeah, so it just depends on, but I'm not picky with that. I kind of just get whatever's circulating,
Yeah, totally.
I get to explore it, and every now and then I'll have one where I'm like, wait a minute, I don't want that one anymore. You know what I mean? But the thing is, like, there is definitively more growth, I feel, for someone who in the past has been super like analytical and rigid and maybe riddled with anxiety and stuff like that. Like, when you're on the path of cultivating a relationship with yourself and expanding consciousness, cannabis can fucking like put the speed wheels on that shit, in my opinion. And so, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, totally. Yeah. I mean, it just, I think, adds a little context for the listeners to understand, because I think, when some people hear about evaluating your relationship and blah, 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 they might be thinking like, stop using cannabis, but that's not what you're saying at all. You're just saying, change your relationship, change your mindset, change the way you talk about cannabis, because we have been indoctrinated with all of these negative thoughts, not just about cannabis, but like like about so many different substances. And that really can float in the back of your mind, especially when you're talking to someone like either your parents, your grandparents, other people that might be older in society who have been exposed to even more of this notion that cannabis makes you stupid and lazy and, you know, a useless member of society. Like, we have been just exposed to that for so long, and we know it's not the case.
Show me a pothead that is a quote unquote stoner and quote unquote useless to society, and we'll find the parents or the people that were around them growing up that told them that that's what they were.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's really sad.
Repetitively told them that that's what they were.
Yeah. You know? And that's sad because I know so many successful stoners, and they're like the most motivated and passionate people that I know. And a lot of that too is like stoners getting together and smoking together. And like, maybe the intention is to think of ideas for something. Like, I do this with my friends a lot. Like, if we're like, someone's like, I'm starting a new business and I need to help, like, thinking of ideas for the name. It's like, we'll all get together, we'll smoke, we'll talk about it, we'll get creative, we'll get a whiteboard out, and we'll start writing down every thought that comes to our head. Like, that is so fun, and you get so creative, and that's like the beauty and the magic and the intention of that experience.
Yeah, and so the last thing that I feel compelled to say here is that I'll often say, like, when it comes to health, whether or not carcinogens or long-term use, neurological effects, etc., that's not something I'm never, maybe never say never. I do not currently provide any guidance related to any of that. You know what I mean? Like, I just don't do it.
Yeah. It's okay. We actually like don't know much about the long-term effects of cannabis, but what we do know is it can't be that bad because people have been using it chronically for an extremely long time, and there's not a ton of evidence that it's bad for you. And the other thing, like, what is bad?
To your point too, is like, or to add on to that, rather, you know, people talk about like before age, what is it, 18 or 20 or 25?
Yeah, 18. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, 25 is like your brain fully developed.
Yeah, but I was smoking weed when I was 16, you know? I'm all right.
Yeah. I'm super
I have my moments. I have my moments where I'm like, whoa, where did that thought go?
Well, that is so funny because I've been consuming since I was 14. I'm like super open about the fact that I've been a chronic consumer since essentially 14. And, you know, the literal only potentially negative side effect is short-term memory. So whenever I'm like giving a talk or something, I'll explain that, whatever. And then somebody will say something and I'm like, oh, by the way, it affects your memory. And that will come up later too. And you make jokes about it because if you think about all like the pros and cons of using cannabis, like a slightly like less ability to recall things it's so far outweighed by all the positives that cannabis has provided in my life that to me it's just like, I carry around a notebook to help compensate for that because I write down things like people's names that I might forget or like other important things that I really want to remember. And then it's easy to compensate for. And just a little bit of science behind that. The reason why, you know, people who chronically use cannabis tend to have a not so great short-term memory, it really has to do with how cannabis affects your sleep and how you consolidate memories during REM sleep. And if you are a chronic cannabis user, you likely will have a reduction in REM sleep when you are using cannabis. It can affect your sleep quality, but it can still help you get to sleep. But since you're not consolidating those memories during REM, you might have a slightly less ability to remember things, specifically short-term things.
Yeah, all I know is that, like, from my experience, I've been the lazy stoner that doesn't want to do fuck all much of shit the whole day to a guy who's running a business that he's passionate about and utilizing cannabis pretty consistently, but I'm out doing shit all the time. I'm always doing stuff. You know what I mean? Like, I don't have time that I lay down and watch anything, really. Maybe like one lighthearted comedy a week. Aside from that, I'm either reading or I'm out in nature or I'm creating content or whatever, like.
Yeah, I think there's
totally different, the idea that people don't change is not correct.
And that kind of has to do with whether it's cannabis or psychedelics or these other substances. It's like it can help initiate that plasticity of even telling your brain, like, we can change, we can create new connections, we can expand, but your brain can also contract if you let it. It can go into that deep, dark place, but it can also expand and be really beautiful how it can change the way that you think and you process the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Same.
Is there anything else that you want to bring up? But also, please let listeners know where they can find you on the internet or through any other way that you prefer to be contacted. And I just have really enjoyed this conversation. And I think it's something that a lot of people are curious about and maybe want to start shifting their mindset. And I think you've provided so many good tools and information for the listeners. I think they'll really enjoy it.
Well, fuck, so I really appreciate that. I hope it's okay that I've cursed on here. I don't.
Oh, yeah. All
good.
Cool.
So I have, it's just the name Phil Stille on like TikTok and Instagram. But if you're someone who just kind of wanted to have a discovery call with me, the webpage is stillemind.com. So it's STILLEMIND.com. And then there's more information on me there, my podcast and stuff like that. I would love to have you on my podcast.
Absolutely. I would love to go on.
Great. Okay, sweet. Cool. I offer a discovery call to anybody that resonates with my message at no cost. I never charge for that. There may be a time in the future where that becomes more challenging to offer, but as long as I'm able to offer it, I'm offering it, and it's
cool.
All right. Thanks for listening. And if you haven't already, please leave a 5-star review wherever you listen to this podcast, whether it's Apple, Spotify, or somewhere else. It really helps grow the podcast and get to new listeners. I hope that you have a beautiful and relaxing weekend coming up. We're getting started on leaf peeping season here in New Hampshire. So the air is getting crisp, the apples are red, and it is finally sweater weather again. I will be recording a podcast next week with Mary Clifton, who is a medical doctor. If you have specific health questions for Mary, please drop them on the Patreon post about that episode. So far, we have questions on thyroid issues, psychosis, menopause, and CHS. And I'll make sure to ask whatever else we have time for on that episode. So please feel free to ask. Mad love. We will see you next week. And again, thanks for listening.